All right, I'm going to call this meeting of the County Board, Champaign County Board, to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Storr. Straub.
Yes.
Taylor.
Here.
Thorsland. Vanek Theranot. Wilson. Coert. Esri.
Here.
Barney.
Here.
Furtado.
Here.
Greer. Hanauer Friedman.
Here.
Locke.
Here.
Lockshin.
Here.
Michaels. Owen.
Here.
Pugh. Rodriguez. Rogers. Sexton. Smith.
Here.
Carter.
Here.
Have a quorum. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Jenny Lockshin with the motion, Ed with the second. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to public participation. Brian Dolinar.
Turn on the microphone with the red.
Good evening. I'm Brian Doliner. I live in Urbana. I'm coming tonight to speak about the public safety sales tax. For more than 10 years, we fought the public safety sales tax, which was then being proposed to construct a new jail or expand the jail. The county now has expanded the jail, not with public safety tax, but with COVID money, which we've also fought. The county has a new jail. I'm getting calls from the jail with new problems at the jail. I'm a local community journalist, and people often report to me with issues that come up. They have a new phone system, which we proposed, and now I've got individuals in the jail texting me with, they can text me messages from the jail with their various problems. I can't solve all their problems, but I try to listen. And now the county wants more money for fortifying its broken criminal justice system. In spite of the fact that crime across the country is down, crime locally is down, things spiked during COVID, but they've dropped rapidly since. And crime fluctuates, and it's been shown to have no relationship to prosecution, the buildup of mass incarceration. The prison population in Illinois has dropped by 40%. We're sending fewer people to prison. We're letting more people out of prison. There's less money needed to prop up this system that we have. I think there's a trend towards decarceration, toward community solutions, and county resources should be going towards supporting those kinds of alternatives to incarceration. The prison population, when I started working on these issues, was at its height around 50,000, almost 50,000 people in Illinois incarcerated in some 27 prisons, and now we have a prison population just under 30,000. Part of this public safety sales tax is being pitched as supporting the state's attorney's office, which is already well resourced, as is evidenced by the state's attorney's current prosecution of 8 individuals for mob action due to student free speech demonstrations in support of Palestine, which took place all across the country and internationally. According to the New York Times, there was over 3,000 individuals charged during the protests in April. Most all of those have been dropped. And State's Attorney Julia Reitz continues to maliciously prosecute individuals in the community, students, some at the time as young as 17 years old, prosecuting them for mob action and threatening them with felonies. So if the state's attorney has the resources to prosecute these kind of cases, in addition to the routine overcharging and prosecution of poor and black people in the community, the county board should not support this kind of taxation, this kind of burden to the public. I would just urge the public and the county board to consider this in light of the charges against those being hit with mob action charges, and further urge the state's attorney, Julia Reitz, who has been attending these kind of meetings, urge Julia Reitz to drop the charges. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Sana Sabuwala.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, my name's Sana Sabwala. I live in Urbana. I'm a member of Muslim Action Committee here in Champaign-Urbana. I also want to talk about the proposed sales tax and dropping the charges against student protesters. I'm a tax-paying citizen of Champaign County, and I'm worried about the proposed budget and the potential sales tax increase to support public safety. It's been empirically shown time and time again that increasing police funding is not the solution to making our city safer, and that's why Urbana has been pushing to look into alternatives of policing. It's something that, like, locally many people have been talking about for a long time now. So, you know, the decision to support increased budgets for public safety, there's like a large movement locally against that. I'm already concerned about misuse of funds. The charges against most encampment demonstrators across the country have been dropped, as Brian was saying earlier, but our local residents are facing the harshest charges in the country. The longer these court cases move on through the court system, the more tax dollars they cost. This is relevant to me because as a taxpayer, more county resources are needed to investigate, prosecute, and try felony charges and misdemeanors. We have abundant evidence that the encampment was always intended to be a peaceful anti-war protest. Violence only happened when police got involved, and even then the police only wanted to charge accused with misdemeanors. It seems to me to be a huge waste of resources from the county to prosecute anti-war protesters with felony charges. I want to understand why the state's attorney's office is using our apparently limited resources to prosecute anti-war protesters with the harshest charges in the country. Is the proposed budget and potential funds increase through this new tax going to be spent on terrorizing children who are exercising their right to criticize the government by charging them with felonies? What's next, incarcerating graffiti artists? The county board is also asking the public to eliminate the position of auditor, which would remove more oversight on how our tax dollars are being spent. If you already know that you need more money to pay for an increased budget, I think we should spend time considering using our current resources more responsibly. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anyone else that wishes to participate, so I'm going to close this portion of the agenda and move directly to the budget presentation. First one up is Children's Advocacy Center, Carrie Miller.
Good evening. I'm going to have a brief introduction, and then Carrie can start with hers. Kind of nerve-wracking being Tammy sitting right behind me and being judgy probably. Anyways, tonight we will focus on special revenue funds. Tuesday and Wednesday we will focus on the general fund. Just a reminder that the stuff we talk about this week are very preliminary estimates. Amounts will probably change, will definitely change before we finalize the budget. A couple other notes, AFSCME and non-bargaining salary costs are flat in FY25 right now because we still are unknown about that. Health insurance is not finalized, so we have estimated a 15% increase for FY25, but that will change too, most likely. And then one other item that you'll see in a lot of the funds are the interest and investment revenue are crazy high in FY25. I'm not expecting that to last like the same in 24. I'm not expecting them to be that high in 25. For an example, in the general fund, there's over 300,000 in revenue in interest and investments that were over budgeted. So with the feds possibly lowering interest rates and everything, 25 will probably be back to a little bit closer to normal. And now let's just go ahead and jump in, and we'll start with the Children's Advocacy Center.
Hello. For FY25, so the Children's Advocacy Center, all of our grants run on a July 1 to June 30th fiscal year, so we already know that this is the funding we're getting because it's already in place, so at least for the first half of the county's FY25. For DCFS, we are receiving, or started receiving an increase of $5,881. This is to align with the DCFS mandated salary increases that they've implemented for all programs and contracts through their department. We also received an additional $6,500 from United Way. This is through their child well-being grant to pay for counseling services for child victims of abuse and their family members. We also received an additional $2,000 from the State of Illinois Attorney General's Office Violent Crimes Victim Assistance Grant. And we also received a new grant from the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois for $5,000, and this is to pay for a strategic planning session, which is required every 3 to 5 years for our reaccreditation.
Questions, comments? Thank you, Carrie. Chris? Go ahead, Chris, sorry.
I don't think I've ever been as moved by a presentation as when you asked for money for a new carpet some time ago.
I thought about that on the way here tonight.
And just want to say thanks for the good work that you're doing. Are you seeing a relative increase in the need for services?
It ebbs and flows. We were at an all-time high during COVID, and over the last year, it declined quite a bit, but we're back on an uptick of an increase. And then September and October are typically really busy for us when kids all get back in school and start talking to their teachers about things that have gone on over the summer.
Stephanie?
This might be a more Travis question. I noticed in this and in several of the other special revenue funds, it does look like there's a salary increases built into this. Is that because those salary, like I know you had said that the stuff on the general fund is flat, but it doesn't look like that's the case on some of these special revenue funds. Is that because that's already known within these funds, like increases?
So for the Child Advocacy Center, there's a lot of strong suggestion from DCFS about what their pay rates need to be. So that's for this one, and DCFS is providing the money, so we weren't going to argue with that one. Some of the other ones, the Special Revenue Fund department head wanted to build the increase in, so they already had the money allocated and are waiting to see what the ASME non-bargaining situation is going to end up being, but they didn't want to have to come back for a budget amendment afterwards, so.
And for our program, we're just now caught up because there were 4 or 5 years that we didn't get increases when the county did, just because we're 99% grant funded, and if we don't get increases to the grants, we can't pass those increases on.
Thank you. Next up is GIS Consortium and then the GIS Fund. Leanne?
Is this on? Okay.
There's a capital expenditure of $7,500 included in the FY25 budget. That'll cover relocation needs to the Bennett Administrative Center. Other things, the capital and technology purchases are based on a 5-year capital and technology plan. So in FY25, that appropriation is $75,909. So that explains why in that department the expenditures exceed revenues. And just for your knowledge, the ortho imagery funds, we collect those every year. They're expended in the 3rd year, which will be 2026. But those are deferred until they're expended. So those dollars are not included in the fund balance calculations. Other than that, if you have any questions.
Not seeing any. Go ahead.
For the GIS fund, this fund pays for the county's membership dues to the GIS consortium, as well as the Esri software, which is the GIS software. The main source of revenue for this fund is the fees collected by the recorder's office on documents filed and recorded. Currently, the fee is $15. $1 goes to the recorder and the rest to GIS. The number of documents has significantly dropped over the years, leading to a 40% decrease in revenue since 2021, which has resulted in the fund balance dropping. In this budget, though, you'll see 25 revenue actually increases. Built into this budget is a fee increase to $25 based on a fee study that was done. If we don't increase the fees and we stay at the $15,000 or the $15, the revenue will be $210,000, and the fund balance would drop to $150,000. So that is one thing that I will probably be bringing to the board in the next month or so to see if we want to increase to $25. And again, that's built into these numbers.
Thanks, Trav. Oh, go ahead, Jamala.
Can you say those numbers again, since these aren't the actual numbers? What are the actual numbers?
Yeah, if it stays at $15, the revenue will drop by $140,000. So fines, fees, and charges will be $210,000. And then the fund balance total will drop to about $150,000. To that, it will drop by $140,000 to $150,000.
The backup for this fund is the general fund. So if we don't increase the revenue into this fund, we have to start allocating money from the general revenue to support these costs.
Further questions? Not seeing any. Thank you. Next up is the Board of Health. We have Kathy Emanuel and John Peterson. Oh, and we have the director as well.
Good evening. I'm Julie Pride. I'm the administrator at Champaign-Urbana Public Health District. And up here, last chance to get a speak. Okay, I don't want to. So what we have up here is the FY 2025 levy increase by 3.5. It's split between CUPHD and the Board of Health based on EAV. We will have the Workforce Development Grant through FY 2027. And then from the County Board of Health fund balance, they've budgeted $15,000 for emergency services. Now what that is just money that is set aside. We haven't used it in the past many years, but we just they push it aside in case there's something that we have to get on really quickly. $30,000 for the teen pregnancy prevention in county schools, and then $25,000 for Promise Healthcare, Smile Healthy program for the recruitment of dentists. And then the fund balance will be 38% if the full 70,000 is spent, excluding 162,000 received upfront for the workforce development grant. It's not in the fund, but the balance would then be 25%, which is what we're aiming for.
Dr.
I
Storr.
didn't even recognize you. I literally did not recognize you. Okay.
Hi, Julie.
Hi.
It's Don.
I see you.
Is it on or off?
It's on.
Okay. Hi, Julie.
Hi.
I just had one question. I think you might have answered in the last slide, but just for clarification, the workforce development grant, is that a total of 162,000 over how many years?
It is, well, it started this year, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's dragging on through 2027.
Got it.
It's in the budget. It's a personnel type thing where it'll be spent on training.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Dr. Storr.
Hi.
Hi.
Good to see you. I'm curious about the recruitment of dentists for, that's, pretty difficult, kind of.
It is. This is actually not for CUPHD. We also are recruiting dentists, but it's for Smile Healthy, who sees the county kids outside of Champaign and Urbana, because that's how it was set up. So it is for them to help recruit. Because they're an FQHC, Federally Qualified Health Center, they have higher reimbursement rates, and they also can help pay off student loans, and they're still having trouble. We are working really closely with them, which we haven't done for a very long time. So we're working really closely to see how we can maximize the CU Public Health District dentist in space and their dentist in space, and we're going to put something together. We don't know what it is, but we've lost a dentist that was wonderful that we had forever. She just resigned to be with family. So it's very hard to get a dentist, and we're talking only for kids, and they're the highest reimbursed group. So getting dental for adults is just insane. And honestly, until we ever have a legislative fix, I don't think that we're ever going to get past this. It's certainly not just in Champaign County. It is everywhere.
Stephanie.
This might be a you and a Travis question. On your expenditures on page 17, it's just everything has fluctuated quite a bit. Like your professional services is up by a third, your operational services is totally gone, your contribution and grants is down by a quarter. So is that just a different categorization of things, or is that actually reflecting and changing services? What is driving those? Because that's a pretty noticeable kind of shifting around of money.
So overall, in the expenditures, it's not that big of an increase, and it has a lot to do with how the auditor's office is shifting around object codes, categorizing different, how to categorize expenditures.
As someone whose kids have had to use that state insurance where they can find like 2 places to get dental and, dental care in the county, I think it's some of the best money spent. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you. All right, moving on. We have highway funds. Jeff Blue has 5 of them.
Good evening. Yes, we have 5 different special revenue funds for the Highway Department, beginning with the traditional highway fund. This is kind of our operations fund where we fund all of our personnel and do all of our equipment purchases and turn on the lights and so forth. When we built the building back in 2008, we did a bond for the building. It was a 10-year bond. So in 2018, we started taking the money that we were putting into the bond and putting it into what we call kind of a sinking fund for building maintenance. So we continue to move money from this fund over to the 062 fund for building maintenance, just to make sure that anything happens, we can cover it and we don't have to come asking for money. So you'll see $714,000 of our fund balance is actually accredited to that sinking fund. So the effective fund balance of our highway fund is about $3.4 million. We got $500,000 in 2025 for equipment. We have the Wilbur Avenue project, which has been ongoing for some time as far as getting that ready to go, but we believe we will actually be able to construct that this year if we can get everything through and get it all done. So we have $250,000 in revenue coming from DCEO, which is also shown as an expenditure out of the highway fund. So those are the highlights from the highway fund. The highway building capital fund is what I talked about previously. Right now, if you drove down Art Bartel, we just got done paving the parking lot around the Salt Dome. That Salt Dome was built in 1994, so that parking lot's 30 years old. It had seen better days, so we tore it out and reconstructed it and just did the asphalt on that. So that came out of this sinking fund. We have a meeting tomorrow. Dana's set up a meeting with a solar group to talk about possibly putting solar panels on the back of the highway department building because it faces south and we got a huge roof up there. Been kind of waiting on that project because we got that roof replaced a couple years ago because of the hail damage. And we had a few issues with the roof with some leaks, and I wanted to make sure we got all those taken care of before we started putting more holes in the top of that roof and start blaming it on other things other than a bad roof that was put on by the contractor. So we don't have any major expenditures that we have budgeted for in this fund unless the solar panel comes through, but I don't have any kind of budget number to put forward on that right now. But if that does come through, we'll be looking at possibly doing that. The County Bridge Fund is what the name says, although it should be really named the Township Bridge Fund because the statute says that this money is primarily used for matching township bridges and small municipal bridges. So any municipality under 5,000 can apply to the county to get 50% help with funding on bridges. And obviously the townships, we help them. We do their designs. We oversee their construction. We pay for part of the funds out of this county bridge fund, and the rest of it comes out of the township bridge fund, which is that second bullet point. And you'll see there that last year, first time since 1979, they actually raised the township bridge fund, but they quadrupled it, which was a big raise. They went from $15 million a year up to $60 million a year statewide. And then in this last legislative go around, and this was just effective a few days ago, they made it statutorily dedicated. That used to just be kind of a fund that they could maybe fund and maybe not, but now it's statutorily dedicated, and we can actually use 100% of the township bridge funds to fund some township projects. So that will help out some of those townships that don't have the money to match the county bridge fund. We'll be able to help them out with the TBP funds. So you can read the number of projects we have obligated for the county bridge fund. Lots of township bridges there, as well as the village of Savoy and the village of Fisher for 2025. And even though we have a fund balance of about $2.5 million, you'll see the unobligated balance, which is basically what we don't have obligated to any bridge that we have started doing construction and planning on, is only about $400,000. So we've got a lot of money that's going to be spent in the future. It just takes time. Anytime you put a bridge project in the pipeline, it's at least a year, if not two, from the time you start thinking about what you're going to do, get it through the engineering process, get all the permits that you need, and actually bid it and construct it. So it takes a while to get projects through. So you'll see those projects, sometimes they get built in the year in which we plan for them, and sometimes they get built in the following year. It really just depends on how much time it takes to get that all through the process. So moving on to the motor fuel tax fund. Every time you go to the gas pump and pump gas, 38 cents of that goes back to the state of Illinois. They apportion that out to all the local municipalities by a formula. You see we get revenue of somewhere $3 to $4 million in that range. We have a decent fund balance in this right now because the state had the Rebuild Illinois funds, which were apportioned out to the counties, and we were obligated to spend that money, and that was about $6 million. So that kind of helped take over some of those projects that we were having to use our motor fuel tax funds on. But now that we've fully expended the $6 million, and now we're back to having motor fuel tax as our only stream of revenue from the state for road projects, then you're going to start seeing this fund balance start to go down, because 3 to 4 million doesn't quite cover what we need to do on a given year based on the roads that we have in Champaign County. So we got $4 million for infrastructure improvements this year. We got $1 million for maintenance. You'll see the infrastructure project that we do have planned for those that live out in the Homer-Sydney area is the road from Sydney over to Homer and on over to the East County line, cold in place recycling with widened asphalt shoulders and an asphalt overlay. So that's what we're doing with the motor fuel tax money next year. The Highway Federal Aid Matching Fund, the name says it's what it is. It's money that has to be used to match federal aid funds. So typically on a county highway project, when we get federal money, it's 80% feds and 20% county. So we do a $5 million job, we need about $1 million to match that $5 million job. And that's what this fund is exclusively set up to do. We don't have any federal aid projects in 2025, but you'll see the balance is getting to the point where we could fund a decent sized project as far as being able to match the federal dollars. So that's what I got. Any questions that I can answer for you?
Good, Stephanie.
This is kind of more of a comment. I think this is like an important like object lesson. On page 28, if you look at the projected fund balance in whatever fund this is, the bridge fund, it's $2.5 million. But as he just described, the unobligated is only going to be $400,000. So I think this is really important for us to understand. When you look at a fund balance, it is the total amount that we have on hand that isn't being budgeted for 2025. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not obligated. Often within fund balances, there are things that are, we know we're going to spend it on in 2026 or 2027, or do you know what I'm saying? And so I think sometimes people see this and they're like, oh, you have a $2.5 million fund balance. But that's not the case. Just like our general fund balance has the opioid money in it. And so I think what has become clear to me is not everybody in the county understands that. And so I want to, like, when I see that, point that out, because I think that that's a really important thing to and I think sometimes it's hard for the public to understand it. It's like, oh, you got $2.5 million in the bank. Yeah, but we know we're going to do something with it, right? And so I just wanted to bring that up because I feel like this is such a clear example of that.
Right.
And so I just wanted to say that.
And I finally understand obligated and unobligated after being county engineer for 30 years. So, anything else?
Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. It's good to see you,
Good to
as
see you.
always. I was intrigued by something you said about the township bridge fund, and I think it was that some of the money is to help townships when they can't raise their match.
Right.
What's the impediment for, is it because the townships are, kind of have more maintenance than they can, or, I mean, what's the big reason why townships can't raise their matching?
Well, you get into townships like Rantoul, Mahomet, Champaign, Urbana, where they have a population, they can typically get the match. But you go out to Kerr Township or Harwood Township where nobody lives and they don't really have any taxing ability, their whole county bridge fund in a given year might raise $10,000 or $15,000. It's very, very minimal because they just don't have anything out there to tax. There's no community.
Oh, so these are kind of income, or how do the townships raise that money? Is it by income or
Well,
per person?
they have a bridge tax as well. They have a road tax and a bridge tax just like we do. And whatever rate that's at, if they don't have a lot of taxable ground or homes or properties in their township, then they don't get much money into their fund. So they get a little bit of motor. Some of these townships only get $60,000 to $75,000 a year in motor fuel tax funds to do 50 miles of roadways in a given year. I mean, they just don't have any money out there in some of those very lightly populated townships.
It's their property tax levy, Dr. Storr,
Right.
is where they get their funds.
That's what I was kind of
They're-
getting to.
It's
So
their property tax.
It,
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So so you get outside of Champaign County and go down southern Illinois where there's really no money. Some of those townships down there don't have enough money to build any bridges. So the fact that the state statutorily said we can use 100% TBP money on a township project is a boon for them, because now they can actually build some projects that maybe they might have had to save 10 or 20 years just to build one bridge. And now they're able to do it because the state says we can use 100% of those funds for those bridges.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right, thank you.
Next up is Animal Control. Director Kellum is just now coming off of over a week's medical leave, so he will not be here tonight. Michelle will go ahead and take the lead on this.
My favorite department, y'all know that. All right, so we're still working on transitioning into the new building. It's going slow because we're trying to do as much ourselves with our facilities crew as possible. So we think we're gonna spend about $50,000 this year, and we'll spend the other $100,000 that we allocated out of the fund balance this year. We'll spend it next year. So that's what you're seeing in that fund balance. You're seeing the money move around. We're continuing to see an increased cost of medical supplies, vet services, fuel, and utilities. I think all of you have probably heard at some point, every shelter, every rescue, every animal control facility is full. There are animals everywhere. We are dealing with that just as much as everyone else, working very hard to get our rescues to take as much as possible. Humane Society takes them when they can, but there's just too many unspayed, unneutered animals out there reproducing. So we are working on the, just tangentially, the ARPA funds that you all allocated for the low-cost spay and neuter. We've got that program up and running. We've contracted with a couple of vets, so we have a set number of appointments, a set cost that we know, and either we take our animals from the facility or we take requests from community members to have their animals spayed or neutered. So there was a lot of details in getting that set up correctly. We're talking about medical surgery and animals and all that kind of stuff, but it is up and running, and the community's really benefiting from it, so that's been nice. The other major thing we were working on was the updating of our intergovernmental agreement. After much discussion with the state's attorney's office, I think we have an agreement that we like. Right now, what we're working on is figuring out how to implement it into the new software program that we got. So we want to make sure that we can bill for it the way we've written for it in the contract, and not generate a lot of work for ourselves in manual labor. So once we get those kinks worked out, we'll be ready to go out and talk to the governmental agencies about the new agreement, but we want to get that in-house stuff taken care of first. Any questions?
Not seeing anyway. All right. On to mental health. Lynn Canfield is out of the country, I believe, but she's got someone from her staff here to cover for her.
Associate Director for the Mental Health Board and Developmental Disabilities Boards, and yes, she's out of the country, and I have my phone here because she says, "Hey, Leon, if there's anything you need help with, just text me." Well, she's like a million miles away, so I'm not gonna text her, but I'm sure she's, looking in, so I'll do my best here. So we have several highlights here. 85% of the total budget is allocated to contracts with community-based organizations for services and supports for people who have mental health conditions, substance use disorders, and developmental disabilities. Community-based care is meant to help people thrive, reducing and deflecting from institutionalization and incarceration, which have negative impacts on individuals' wellness, families, and communities, and are costly to other public systems. The budget includes other supports to agencies, individuals, families, including anti-stigma events, disability expo resource, online and call center resources, and non-employee trainings, and coaching to improve evaluation and reporting. Next slide, please. All right, so here we have our IDD special initiatives. This fund seeks to improve immediate, shorter term, and community-based relief to people who have IDD and complex support needs. The fund relies on the use of fund balance, which accumulated from the sales of 2 group homes that could no longer be operated due to staff shortages. Transfer from the fund balance will ensure payments on approved contracts with qualified service providers. The fund is under the joint authority of the Champaign County Mental Health Board and Champaign County Developmental Disabilities Board, which contribute equally to the project and make all decisions regarding its use. Both boards rely on input from self-advocates and family members and explore innovations that reduce the need for reliance on the endangered direct support workforce. And our last slide, developmental disability slide. One of the highlights is the DDB budget plan allocates close to 92% of the total contracts with provider agencies for services and supports for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. These contracted services and supports promote access and integration to the community, reduce the risk of institutional care, and allow people with disabilities to pursue their best lives. The DDB will host monthly learning opportunities for service providers, advocates, and interested parties, a study session featuring self-advocates, and large in-person expo for people with disabilities and their support networks. And I think ran through that very quick. I think that covers us in a nutshell.
Questions? Dr. Storr.
Thank you. Mr. Bryson?
Yes.
Are you seeing, folks, overall an increased need for services for intellectual and developmental disabilities? You thought I was going to ask about mental, didn't you?
I did, but that's okay. I know that with IDD, we're seeing a major need, a major push for transportation. I think maybe my supervisor may have mentioned that last time or a couple months ago, but there's a dire need for transportation for individuals who need to get to medical appointments, to just overall. So transportation is very high on the list of needs. I'll just pause there.
Further questions from anybody? Mr. Bryson, you did a great job. Thank you very much. Oh,
Well, nope.
Don, go ahead. Dr. Owen.
Thanks. Thanks, Leon.
Hey.
Excellent, and I'm glad that you didn't text Lynn. I'm sure she's...
Oh, she texted me just a moment ago.
Oh, man.
Yeah, she's still working.
Yeah. This might be a newbie question, and the rest of the board might not already know this, but since I'm new here, is the IDD special initiatives, is that eventually designed just to go away? Like, is it designed to be spent out when the fund balance is gone? And
So-
it's not designed to be like renewed, or grants aren't being written to fund it?
Yeah, it's gonna disappear over the next 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
So,
Okay, that's all I needed to know. Thank you, and really appreciate your presentation.
Any more questions? Go ahead.
I'd like to go on public record encouraging Lynn to take a break.
thank you. I will certainly let her know that. She'll be texting me in a moment. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Oh, Stephanie, I guess you have one more question.
Sorry, and this might be, again, a little bit more for Travis. This fund balance compared to the amount of money in in the budget seems on the higher side. Is there a reason for that? I didn't see, and maybe I'm just missing it. I didn't see, like, a lot of times there's an explanation of the fund balance. Are we saving up for something, or it just seems higher than some of the other ones, right? It's like 60-something%, I think.
I will probably have to get with Lynn when she gets
Okay.
back to kind of get a better answer for you
Okay.
on that.
I just didn't know if there was like a project that was in mind for it, or, yeah.
Isn't, I don't think our fiscal cycle is the same as your grant cycle, is it?
Right, we're July 1 through June 30th.
So that might be part of it as well. Yeah.
Further questions? Going once, twice. Thank you, Mr. Bryson.
Thank you.
All right, next is regional planning. Someone named Tammy Ogden is going to be coming forward, I think. Oh, no, excuse me. Orion will be coming forward. Tammy will be supporting role.
Tammy's here to answer all the hard questions. All right, ready? Don, good to go? Okay, yeah, you can go to the next page. Yeah. So, going to go ahead and start with an overview of RPC for fiscal year 25. Fiscal year 25, we're looking at approximately 305 staff, which is fairly steady compared to last year. We always typically sit around 300 employees. And then as far as agency, we're 7 funds, one that's an operating fund to handle all the administrative cost. The other 6 funds are related to different programs we have. As of right now, there's approximately 157 grants, 9 programs. Over 90% of our funding is directly related to federal and state funding. And then as administrative cost typically sits at around 7% of our overall budget. I think we're projecting for fiscal year 25 to sit around 6%. What this means is it's usually very good because most of the grants are between 15 and 20% as far as a cap on your state and your federal administrative costs that you can tag to the grant. Having somewhere around 7% means that we're extremely competitive and able to apply for grants and have a good chance of, more competitive with those. And then just one thing to note real quick before we go into each one of the individual funds is that the fiscal year 2024 that I've included on these is the revised budgets at the time that I was preparing the presentation here. So when you're seeing the $67 million for 2024, that's where we're sitting as of right now in 2024. I think the original budget was sitting around 61 million at the beginning of 2024. So if you're seeing discrepancies between what's in the binder here and what's up on the presentation, it's just original budget versus where we're sitting to date for the revised budget here. Okay, so for Fund 75, we're currently sitting at around $30 million. For 2024, we're projecting about $36 million for fiscal year 25. Fund 75, it includes regional initiatives for emergency rental assistance, planning, development, communities, and social services, and the implementation of energy efficiency strategies. Funds utilized as well for the tracking of administrative overhead across all of the funds, as mentioned earlier. A decline in fund balance is projected for 2024 by the end of the year, and this is due to spending the last of any COVID funding that was outstanding, the emergency rental assistance funding, ARPA, and et cetera there on that piece. Staffing levels, again, are expected to remain fairly steady, always dependent upon the funding levels and what sort of grants that come up. And then the one noticeable increase within this fund, I believe I came to you guys, I think I had documented for July of this year where I had came over and basically asked for $4 million in funding related to fringe and indirect. So for fiscal year 25, it's budgeted at $4.3 million for fringe and indirect. And what that is, it's not additional funding that we're receiving. It is just interdepartmental transfers across the different grants and our administrative overhead line. So that way, it's a matching principle at the end of the day to make sure that your revenue's matching with the expenses for each one of the grants, and first to better track everything is really all it is. Again, it's not additional funding, it's just for reporting at the end of the day. Okay, then we got Fund 2060, which is our police training fund. No expected changes in this operation for fiscal year 25. You will see a bit of a drop from the revised budget of 24 of 1.1 million down to about 900,000 for 2025. So last year was the first full year of it being recorded as its own fund under 2060. Prior to that, this fund had always been included within Fund 75. And the reason why we had separated it out, it was because our external auditor recommended it. We have to have an external audit specific to this fund for the state. So they basically come in and audit this grant. And this fund is really one grant at the end of the day, including some match from different municipalities across the area. So we took the recommendation basically for the ease of the audit going forward, and we split it out for them. And that drop from 24 to 25 is internal transfers that had to take place between Fund 75 to move the funding over to Fund 60. That's it for Fund 60. Fund 104, the Early Childhood Fund, no anticipated changes there for the current year. Programming utilizes multiple federal and state revenue streams to provide comprehensive full-day child development services to over 511 children and families. It includes enhanced center-based learning platforms responsive to the needs of at-risk infants and preschools. And it includes sustained efforts to incorporate novel approaches to effective child and family service delivery. I know one notable thing is it did have bargain renegotiations a few years back. So the competitive wages have now allowed for us to increase the numbers and be able to fulfill the 511 children and their families there. And then I'm actually going to let Tammy speak to the drop in fund balance, but I'm going to hold that off until the end of the presentation here, if that's all right. Okay. For Fund 109, last year we had a projected or budget of about $19 million for 2024. For 2025, it's expected to be around $15 million. Last year was the first year of operations. This program came over from the university middle of July and heavily funded by the DCEO. And one of the big reasons why the budget is so high currently is they're looking for a new facility. They used to be over there on campus at U of I, and we're currently still in the process of looking to relocate them. A large amount of that funding is basically budgeted for the new facility, and it's been rolled forward into the new grant year for them. That's it. Fund 110, no expected change in operations. Their formula grant for their new fiscal year did increase by $600,000 approximately. This is related to a nice calculation that at the end of the day is based on census data, so we don't really have any control over what's anticipated to be received. It's all, again, based on census data for what they expect for our area. And then in addition to that, there's also some supplemental funding that we're expecting to receive related to working with Parkland and the university here shortly. And then Fund 474 USDA, we continue to evaluate as people come in looking for loans. This program provides low interest loans in rural areas with population of less than 25,000, used to assist with financing businesses and economic development activity to create or retain jobs in disadvantaged and remote communities. No expected changes in activity here. If we were to have to do a loan, we might have to come back to you and bother you for a budget amendment in the next fiscal year. So we have one individual who actually goes out and, as people come to RPC looking for funding related to their different ventures, we've got an individual that evaluates each available source of funding and basically puts them in the best category for what would work best for them here. So as of right now, we're not expecting to necessarily use any of the USDA loans for next fiscal year. And then for Fund 475, this accommodates restricted receiving loan portfolio with proportionate job creation or retention requirements. The funding for fiscal year 25 has been reallocated for the potential acquisition of a new facility, and this is to facilitate the relocation of RPC dependent upon Champaign County's move over to the Bennett Center, Bennett Administrative Center. And then I just want to note, as of right now, at the time of the presentation here for 475, that our cash flow was constrained for this particular fund. While the fund balance does show 4.2 million, 3.7 million of it is actually held up in loans that we've offered out to other individuals. And then the expected expenditure of about 1.6 million that you're seeing for fiscal year 25, that's dependent upon us collecting on those loans and turning around to reuse for the purchase of a facility. I don't know. Tammy, do you want to speak now on the drop in?
Before I start, this is the most excited I've been about legislative budget hearings in 9 years. I thought I might get out of that. I didn't know Orion was going to call on me. Yeah. So we will be coming to you probably next month with a budget amendment request for the Head Start Fund. We lease 2 of our facilities, the West Champaign facility and the Urbana facility, from the Illinois Community Action Development Corporation. And they use our lease payments to service the loans that they have on those facilities. One of those loans is a bank loan that is actually callable in October, and the interest rate on that loan is going to go from 4.5% to 7.5% to 8%. So we actually went to the RPC Commission last week and presented a recommendation to facilitate the early payoff of that loan, and that will circumvent an increase in the interest rate, which would have then been passed on to our program. In conjunction with that, we are also recommending the facilitation of the early payoff of the Urbana facility, and that will be advantageous to the program in many ways. So the payments would come from fund balance, which are essentially funds that have been earned by the program that no longer have federal identity. So in order to facilitate those payments, we will need a budget amendment.
Thank you, Tammy. Any questions for either Orion or Tammy? Okay, good nostalgia question. Go ahead, Chris. Let's have her talk a little bit more.
Can't pass up a reason to interact. On page 10, the Fund 2104, Early Childhood, I did just a little back of the envelope calculation, and you said that you served over 511 children and families. That would be about $26,000 per child and their family, based on oh, I see. Well, slightly less. I used the 2025. Is that about right?
What was the number you said again?
13 million divided by 511.
But what was the number you threw out there per child?
About $26,000.
Yeah, no, I don't believe so. I know that when, this is a whole program number, right? So it's going to include other things other than direct services to children. When I have seen that number before, it's much lower, but it doesn't include, all of the things that are in the total expenditures. So if you were to calculate it that way, then I guess conceivably you could say yes, but that's not how the state or the federal government look at it.
Okay, so that there's a lot of other expenses in there that are not, that I.
They're early childhood division related, but not calculated into a direct, service to an individual child.
Yeah, you answered that perfectly, Tammy. And yeah, the overall budget number is not what you use to divide to get a operational expense of, how much it costs to educate a child or family. But everything that I remember from my previous life is that early childhood through RPC was running slightly less than the school districts in terms of cost per child, in terms of operating expenses. I don't know if that's still the case or not, but I'm remembering it somewhere just north of 10,000.
I believe it's a little less than that when I last saw the number, but I can't recall exactly.
Further questions? Thank you both.
Thank you.
You're welcome to stay, Tammy, if you'd like.
I appreciate it, but no thanks.
All right. Next up is Courts Construction Fund.
So you guys are stuck with Michelle and I for the rest of the night, so hooray. So the Court Construction Fund was created in fiscal year '99. This fund is used for construction and remodeling of the courthouse. The fund balance has been under 20,000 for a couple years, and in FY25, we have budgeted the remaining funds to do modifications to the courthouse after all the moves into the county plaza. So hopefully after 25, this fund will kind of go away.
Questions? Go ahead, Jenny.
I'm not sure if this would be the appropriate place to ask this, but somebody asked me within the last couple months if there's any plan for a CARF for courthouse construction from a facility standpoint, or would a fund like this be that, or that would be something new that's created?
So courthouse maintenance and updating is in the facilities plan. And the courthouse departments have CARF for their general needs. I think if you're talking about more larger scale courthouse modifications, the board would need to be considering bonds. I think the lesson we all know and agree is that the courthouse is always expensive, so. Yeah.
Further questions? Okay, moving on. Courthouse Museum, one of my personal favorites.
So
And Michelle's.
this fund was established to maintain a museum area with the focus of Abraham Lincoln. Decisions regarding projects to be funded are made by the Lincoln Legacy Committee. Each year, we budget about $5,000, and most of the time it doesn't get spent. So the same thing for FY25, we're budgeting $5,000 in case there's a project they want to do, but there's probably a good likelihood that it won't be spent and it will go back to fund balance.
Go ahead, Don.
Where does revenue come from?
So currently, the only revenue really is interest and investments.
I think this fund was originally created by donations by private individuals, and since then has not been funded by the county per se.
Jenny.
Is there any potential for using it this year with the move of other things within the courthouse to shift the museum at all, or is that, I'm just curious, like maybe we'd actually use it this year?
I think that, I think Member Thorsland is our liaison to this committee, and I think we might be to the point where we need to start having a conversation with them about, one, making the museum more accessible, because in the courthouse it's behind security and most people don't know it's there, and you've got that. And two, it has a very large footprint in a very crowded building. And there's a lot of needs in the courthouse. And I think if there's somewhere we can place the museum where it gets more traffic and it gets more usage and we get to free up the space in the courthouse, that's a win-win for everyone. So I think that might be a conversation to start having.
Stephanie?
I believe the Illinois Department of Natural Resources has a small museum fund. I know Indiana did when I was over there, a public museum capital grants program. That might be worthwhile looking into. I mean, maybe they would fund some sort of study on that, how to move it, how to bring people in, I don't know, that might be something to have Kate look into.
Yeah.
And if not, there's a lot of other small museum development funds out there that might be something to have Kate work on.
Yeah, definitely. I can add that to her not very big to-do list. So.
All right, moving on to Public Safety Sales Tax Fund.
So for the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund in FY25, we're currently budgeting revenues of just under 7 million and expenditures of 8.3 million. I'll kind of get to a breakdown of that in a little bit. Some of the programs that we fund out of here are the Youth Assessment Center, Rosecrans, the jail classification system, utilities and minor maintenance of public safety buildings. We added in the budget for 2025 $2 million to start the JANO replacement project, and then debt service for the bonds is about $3.1 million in FY25. Other notable expenditures are usually about $820,000 to utilities from public safety buildings, $450,000 to the Youth Assessment Center and Rosecrans, $450,000. And then also the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund also contributes a portion of the public safety CARF expenditures to from the CARF fund. That's shared with the general fund. So with the 2025 projected budget, the fund balance for 25 is 6.3 million roughly, of which 3.1 is reserved for the bonds, so that can't be spent. So that leaves just over $3.2 million of unrestricted fund balance. And county policy says we need at least $1 million of unrestricted fund balance. So that would leave 2.2 million in flexibility in now and future years.
Go ahead, Jamala.
We just had some people come in and talk about the public safety sales tax in the state's attorney's office, but I see that it's only $120,000 is for personnel. So what does that go to, the personnel?
That's the jail classification sergeant? Lieutenant. Oh, I think I might have offended somebody there. The jail classification lieutenant who has a very important and I believe federally required task about assessment for individuals who are brought into incarceration at the jail. So it covers that, and it covers a portion of somebody else at the jail, I believe. It does not cover the state's attorney's office.
Jenny.
Just a comment. I appreciated the really thorough breakdown of how that fund balance works and what's required to remain in there, because I know that's caused a lot of confusion among county staff and elected officials in the past. So anytime we can break it down again, I really appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Stephanie.
Yeah. So just like right now, as it currently stands, the public safety sales tax has very minimal staff on it. If we expanded the public safety sales tax, that landscape might change, specifically in regards to the sheriff's office. And before, I think Travis was here, and maybe even before JJ, like when it was me and Tammy and Mr. Goss and the executive in meetings talking about public safety sales tax, we would talk like for hours about, well, we could maybe move this classification of employees over. We would maybe move this, like that's something that if we did pass the tax, we would have to decide. Most likely, if we moved personnel onto the tax, it would be sheriff's personnel. At least that's the landscape of conversations that we've had. And we've had a lot of conversations about like, we'd want to move like the entirety of something so that it wasn't like split between different funds. Like, so we'd want to move all of this, do you know what I mean? Like, and so that's something, you know, and we've been pretty transparent. One of the goals of public safety sales tax is to provide the kind of public safety that our county deserves, but it's also to be able to provide some general fund relief, including in part to pay for the Veteran Affairs $1 million, well, at this point, like $750,000 outlay that we're, right? So our budget, personnel is such a big part of our budget that the only way to accomplish something like that, like $750,000 for, to fully fund the VAC liability that the state has given us would be to move personnel. Like there just is not enough other kinds of expenses, right? So if we did see this tax double, we would see in the future more personnel on it. Right now, we have kept, and this has been sort of we've done a lot of the other public safety expenditures from this fund, but not personnel. So I just wanted to sort of, I think that's a super good question. I have not heard any conversations about moving state's attorney, and I believe the other potential eligible staffing would be, you know, the courts, right?
And the public defender.
And with the public, no, are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. There has not been any conversation about moving that side of the shop personnel to this line that I've been a part of. Of course, it's, you know, the board could always decide, like, that's a future us problem, but I think that's a super good question.
Jamala.
Thank you, Stephanie, for the explanation. My other question is about JANO, because there's been so many numbers thrown at us, so I can't remember what the number came in as.
Right. So, yeah, to clarify that a little bit, so the public defender and the state's attorney are interested in a shared program. So I believe the next step for them is we do need to do an RFP for what they specifically need. So hopefully we'll have the RFP out by the end of the year. So that's part of the $2 million that we've just allocated to be able to be spent. We do not think it's going to be anywhere near that. And then the next step would be for the circuit court, the second round with Barry Dunn, where they do the RFP with them. So we don't think we'll be purchasing a JANO replacement next year, but we wanted to set money aside to do that RFP with Barry Dunn for the circuit clerk's office to figure out what program they do want to go with. So I think we're still a few steps away, but we're ready to start spending some money. I mean, if the RFP goes amazing with Barry Dunn and like it's an easy decision, I'm not going to say no, but I mean, and you would all be very well informed, because if we do an RFP, you have to approve the RFP, the request comes back to you, all of that process. But we just wanted to put the money out there so that we could get started on some things.
Leah.
Steph can go first, because I wonder if she's going to say what I was going to say.
Okay, I have no idea what you were going to say, but I am speaking to this. I'm not psychic. I mean, I'm good, but I'm not that psychic. But I think the $2 million, I think to your question is, so if you were following along, the actual sort of free and easy fund balance in this fund is now $2.2 million, right? And so it's 4.2 million total. We put $2 million in here to start JANO, and we left 2.2 million.
I mean, we're gonna need more than the 2 million to get it done that we moved. It's, the 2 million is like best case scenario, we get the RFP done, and then we could start in 2024, or 2025, right? But we would need more money from the fund balance in even with the good estimate that we got in, to get the circuit clerk's part of it done, right? So the 2 million isn't gonna be enough to full board do the project, right? And I also think it's really important to note is, what we're doing is not a replacement. So like, I've heard a lot of people say like, oh, you said it would cost this much money and it costs less. Yeah, because we're not doing what, like, they came back and they decided not to do a full replacement. If we were doing a full replacement, it would have been a lot more expensive, right? So especially the state's attorney and the public defender's piece, like what they want is a lot less than we thought it was gonna be. That's what they want. So that's what they're getting, right? That's what they asked for. That's what they want. They say it's gonna work for them. It saves us a lot of money, so yay, right? But what we were having conversations about like a full replacement, but regardless, it's gonna be more than 2 million. So when we look at this fund balance, because this is gonna relate to the next conversation about capital asset replacement, right now this budget is short. I'll save that to the next part. But we as a board are gonna have to decide which of our two fund balances we are gonna make that shortfall up from. Is it gonna be public safety sales or is it gonna be fund balance? And so I think that's a really good question, because we gotta keep in mind that we don't wanna spend that entire 2.2 million, because we're gonna need some of it in 2026 for sure. Okay.
That kind of close to what I was going to say, but way, way better. But mine is just kind of an aside. I don't recall this being talked about previously in the last year, but under our prior executive, there was an IT upgrade and replacement task force, and they went through, we had the whole people from the board, et cetera, and one of the things on there was JANO. And that is where that huge number came from. This isn't, was it 10 or 15 million? 15? That wasn't a number that admin pulled out of a hat or anything like that. This was something that was studied 4 years ago, and that was where the number came from that everybody's been talking about. So just so you know, I just thought I'd put that out there because there's been a lot of misinformation. And as one of the people that was on the task force, at the time it made a lot of sense. It went with what we were seeing. It went with what was expected.
Go ahead, Michelle.
I just want to, I don't know, kind of go back on a point that came up during public comment. The sheriff and the state's attorney do not decide how many people we jail. That's decided by the court system. It's pretty heavily regulated now by state requirements. So, in this conversation about increasing the public safety sales tax to jail people, that's an inaccurate correlation, and it's not something that we control. We don't control how many individuals other municipal law enforcement departments bring in to the jail. We don't control the bond process. So just as you are navigating that question and conversations about the public safety sales tax going forward, I just want to give you something to point out to them, that we don't have the responsibility of making any of those decisions, but we have the full responsibility of paying for everyone else's decisions. And that's the situation we're in, and we have to figure out a way to fund it. So.
I've got something else too, Steve, real quick. So kind of follow up on Stephanie's point. One thing also to keep in mind is over the last couple of years, we've been saving fund balance strategically because we knew we would be spending this. Last year and in FY23, there was, I think, 1.2 million budgeted each year to transfer from public safety to the general fund, but we did not do that transfer to keep it in fund balance of public safety, this fund, for these reasons.
All right, moving on. CARF, Capital Asset Replacement Fund.
All right, so CARF is one of those funds that ties really closely to both the general fund and public safety sales tax fund because the capital asset replacement fund, the expenditures are basically funded by transfers from those other two funds. Since FY21, CARF expenses have been budgeted between about $7 and $9 million per year. That does exclude the plaza and jail projects though, because if you look at the fund balance for, say, last year, or the expenditures for last year, it was like $28 million. A lot of that had to do with those two projects. So that 7 to 9 million does not include those projects. So because those projects are finishing this year, or hopefully finishing in FY24, the fund balance will be closer to what it has been historically, around $3 million. 2 years ago, it was like $44 million. Last year, it was like 22 million, and that was because we were spending down the bond funds. This fund's just got a lot of weirdness to it. It fluctuates every year based on when items need to be replaced. Some items need to be replaced every 7 years, some every 3 years, and keeping track of that, the expenditures needed to replace those could fluctuate year to year. One thing that we've been doing in admin services is working with all the departments to try to identify any thing that should be on CARF that hasn't been historically on the CARF schedule. And eventually one of the goals that we have is to fund CARF a little bit differently, where we're funding a portion of each replacement every year to kind of, instead of having the ebbs and flows, round it out to a more flat thing. So if something needs replaced every 3 years, fund a third of it every 3 years. Every 7 years, fund a seventh of it every year, to kind of keep that a little more flat. Again, this fund, we're still trying to identify everything, and we will have to have future conversations in this budget process on how we want to fund CARF, because it can come from public safety sales tax, it can come from the general fund, it will come from a combination of the two, but how much of that ratio is something that we'll have to discuss throughout this process. A couple notable items for CARF this year, just as some examples, are we added $200,000 for software items that had been funded by ARPA the last 2 years, but now have to be funded through CARF. There's $300,000 of sheriff vehicle equipment for not the vehicles, but the equipment in the vehicles. $114,000 for the state's attorney digital evidence management system. We've found vehicles that had not been on CARF that have been purchased that we've had to put on CARF. There's been a lot of increases to IT software and subscription costs. A lot of places are now going to the subscription model, and MC doesn't really have a choice other than to have annual expenditures on those. And then we also have in 25 just over $800,000 for the elevator installation over at the county plaza. So those are some notable FY25 items.
Stephanie.
So to follow up on that, and it's kind of hard, so looking at this, it looks like, oh, CARF is less this year than last year, but really that's because those big capital projects, the two big projects are coming off the books. The not that expenses are up. And so right now, our budget is $1.1 million out of whack. Now, there's three things I think that we have to keep in mind. One, that as Travis nicely, succinctly said at the beginning, is including a 15% health insurance spike, which we are hoping We have been in conversations about maybe that isn't going to be the case, but we don't know that yet, right? So that is in the budget. Not in the budget is any sort of raise for any of our unionized or AFSCME folks or non-unionized, right? So like we have some stuff in the budget that we're hoping won't be as bad, and we have some stuff that's just not even in there at all, right? Because at some point they got to print a document. So like that's where we are. But so it hopefully won't be $1.1 million, but it's gonna be something, right? And this board is gonna have to decide, are we pay, and then the third thing is this is a heavy CARF year. Just because, as Travis was saying, there's some things that are on 3-year schedules, some things that are on 7-year schedules, and then just some years it's more, right? So we are gonna have to decide, do we wanna take that from the public safety sales tax fund balance? Or do we wanna take it from the regular fund balance, or do we want a combination therefore, like between the two? So as those other two numbers, the personnel salary numbers and the insurance numbers, over the next month or so, as we get a clearer picture on that, we'll have a better sense of what is that shortfall we need to find, right? And then we're gonna have to decide where we're gonna put it, to be blunt. And so, the good news is, the thing that ultimately will be driving that shortfall is CARF, which is a one-time expense. If it was personnel, that would keep me up at night more, because that's an every year expense, which means that hit would be coming to the general fund over and over and over again. So it's not like doomsday scenario, but we are probably, by that September meeting where we have that decision point thing that we do as a board, that will be the latest time at which we should give these good folks direction, which of those two fund balances we want to make that difference up for. Does that make sense? Okay.
Jamala.
I have a question about the health insurance. I don't know who to ask the question to, so I'll just look at Stephanie. Oh, okay. So we are in negotiations, I'm assuming, with Blue Cross Blue Shield, and is the number that they gave us 15% increase, or where's that number coming from?
So, just for context, they started at 30. They came down to 24. We're a little under 15 at this point. We have a labor management healthcare meeting tomorrow, where we expect to have some final feedback and a vote on if the labor side of that committee is interested in us returning to a health reimbursement arrangement program. So we can talk about this in much more detail at future meetings, but the really quick and dirty version is we can see significant savings in our premiums if we raise our deductible. Our deductible right now is $2,000 and our out-of-pocket is $4,000, which are unheard of low. Like, you just don't find those in health insurance plans. So if we raised our individual to $3,000 and our out-of-pocket to $5,000, but we put in place this health reimbursement arrangement in HRA, the employees would not see an increase in either of those. The county would pick up the difference between the 2,000, the 4,000 to the 5,000 or whatever it is. Sorry, 3,000 to 5,000. So we would need to set money aside for that. Financially, it makes a lot of sense for us because very few people meet their out-of-pocket maximum. So it's a very safe gamble for the most part. And we get the premium savings with a very low likelihood that we have to pay the out-of-pocket difference for many people. So depending on what the Labor Committee says tomorrow, we can be back to talk in more detail about that. If we go that route, we could potentially not be looking at an increase.
Okay, I would love to hear more about that, because I was having conversations, as you know, with some of the sheriff's deputies today at the courthouse, and I was very concerned about the potential increase in the high deductible or the high deductible, so, yeah. Okay.
As are we. So, yeah.
All right, seeing no further questions, let's move on to IMRF.
All right, so IMRF fund, so one thing about this fund is, because we don't know the non-bargaining and AFSCME employee increases, if there are any, this one is budgeted flat for those individuals. So as we move on, if we increase personnel costs, wages, this fund will change as well. But this fund is levied through the property tax levy, except the first $124,000 is paid for from PPRT. And then on the slides, you can kind of see where the preliminary rates are for the regular IMRF and then the SLEP IMRF, which I believe is all in the sheriff's department now.
Yeah, so it's Sheriff's Law Enforcement Program, something like that, but it's the retirement fund for law enforcement.
So again, this fund could change a little bit, increase in expenditures once we get a better wage and personnel number. And then depending upon how much it goes up, the line for the property tax levy might have to be moved around a little bit to cover that difference.
Questions? Okay. Move on to Social Security.
Social Security, it's pretty much the exact same thing I just said about the other slide, except $124,000 is not funded by PPRT. But once we get wages and personnel, this line could change again, and the property tax levy line ratios could kind of fluctuate as well.
On to tort immunity.
So the tort fund pays for workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, and the allocated share of insurance premiums and claims for the general fund. For a long time, this had a negative fund balance. In FY22, Tammy finally got it positive. From what I understand, that's one of her biggest accomplishments that she always brags about, so hooray, Tammy. Historically, the levy growth has not kept pace with this fund, and that was one of the reasons it was hard to get the fund balance positive. And kind of the same thing, things might change on this fund as well as we go forward with the with the budget process.
Stephanie.
I knew this was like Tammy's greatest joy in life. And so when she left, if you recall, we gave her a tort immunity fund tort as instead of a cake, which remains my greatest achievement as finance chair on this board.
Okay. On to self-funded insurance.
Okay, so the revenue from the revenues from this fund come from billings of other county funds to cover the auto, property, and general liability, also the unemployment and workers' compensation claims and stop-loss insurance. These revenues are kind of billed to the other departments through interfund transfers at the end of the year based on the claims and stuff. So it's very hard to kind of predict what the expenditures and revenues are going to be in this fund. So we kind of just threw out, kind of looked at what historically it's been and assumed that it was going to be the same. But sometimes the claims come from multiple, years ago. Sometimes they're current claims. So it just all depends when we get billed for the claims. And one other note, the fund balance does exceed the actuarial's estimate of the unpaid claim liability, which I believe is just under $3 million. So we got a little bit of flexibility, it's a little bit higher than that actuarial report.
We got employee health and life insurance admin fund.
So insurance costs now are directly charged to the county funds. They used to be passed through this fund. So now the only thing that is part of this fund are the administrative costs, such as broker and actuarial fees. These are funded through a health insurance admin fee charged to county funds based on health insurance enrollment. And then also there's a bad expense line item in there in case of FSA expenses exceed payroll deductions. And those are the only things that are really funded in here anymore.
And last, nursing home.
So the nursing home fund, Matrix Care software is still under contract through 2026. However, and then we're paying legal fees to Polsinelli right now under this, with this fund. The legal fees should deplete all the fund balance in the current fiscal year. Any additional cost to legal fees and the Matrix Care software will have to be paid from the general fund once we pay out the remaining fund balance this year.
Jamala.
I'm assuming that it costs more to cancel the Matrix Care software than to just continue to pay it?
It's a legal requirement because it's access to medical records for previous residents. So I believe it's 7 years after the closure of the nursing home, which is why it's till 26.
Further questions, comments? Thank you very much. We are adjourned.
See you guys tomorrow.